Back in September of 2016, I was living just off of St. Martin's Lane in London, and one Sunday, me and a mate of mine met up at our local pub to watch the football game over a few pints. We watched Chelsea barely scrape a point from their match with Swansea City, and then, after full time, my mate got a text from his girlfriend asking if her and a colleague could join us for drinks. About half an hour later, she turns up with her colleagues in tow, and the first thing I thought when I saw the colleague was, wow. She was, without a doubt, one of the most stunningly beautiful young women I had ever laid eyes on, and from the moment I saw her, I was absolutely smitten. For the sake of the story, we'll just call her Sarah. She was half Lebanese, and right away I could tell that there was chemistry between us. Little did I know, but my mate and his girlfriend had conspired to do a bit of matchmaking, as Sarah had sent a photo of me on my mate's girlfriend's Facebook and asked her if I was single. So, they were just as pleased as I was when me and Sarah swapped phone numbers and agreed to go out for a coffee sometime. One coffee date became 2, then 3, and then before we knew it, we were going out together every weekend and eventually decided to make things official. And things went great at first. Sarah was a very passionate young woman, and I loved that about her. But after a while, that passion started to show its negative sides. For start, she could never, ever be wrong about anything. It could be quite cute if she was being playful with it, but about 2 months into our relationship, and she did something which wasn't so cute. So there's this TV game show in the UK called The Chase, and it became a kind of tradition to watch and play along together. We'd both finish work at around 4, and then she'd meet me at Leicester Square tube station, and then we'd head back to my flat to have dinner together. And since The Chase was always on at around 5 o'clock, we'd play along with it while we were eating. One day, one of the questions was something like, which former Beatle first performed his song My Sweet Lord at the concert for Bangladesh in August of 1971? It then gave 4 options, which were A. John Lennon, B. Paul McCartney, C. George Harrison, or D. Edwin Starr. Traditionally, at least in the early rounds of the case, option D was always a joke answer designed to raise a chuckle among the studio audience, and on this occasion, the joke was that Edwin Starr was never actually in the Beatles. It was Ringo Starr that was in the Beatles. Edwin sang that War, What Is It Good For song. Now anyway, I immediately called out George Harrison, which was, of course, the correct answer. But Sarah, who was into much more contemporary music, decided the answer was John Lennon. I told her that she was possibly confusing My Sweet Lord with Imagine, and that in that case, the answer was George Harrison, but then she starts doing her I'm never wrong routine. I just carried on eating. Then, when the correct answer was confirmed as being George Harrison, I said, told you, in the mildest, most non-confrontational way possible. I didn't rub it in her face. I didn't celebrate. I just said, told you, and then we carried on eating and playing along with The Chase. Or at least I thought we had carried on playing, because by the end of the round, Sarah's silence told me that she didn't fancy playing around anymore. I asked her if everything was all right, and instead of returning even a sarcastic reply, she completely ignored me. I asked if she was taking the piss, and again, just completely blanked me. So I told her if she was going to act like a child, she was free to leave anytime she wanted. She then grabbed her purse and coat and slammed the door to my flat on the way out. A few hours later, and several ignored phone calls later, she finally replies to my text telling me how horrible and arrogant I'd been, how I'd made her feel small and stupid, and how I owed her an apology. I had no intention whatsoever of making her feel that way, but when I told her as much, she broke down in tears and started apologizing over and over. She said she was stressed out at work, that her auntie back in Beirut was sick, and that it had all just gotten the better of her in the moment. I forgave her, we kissed and made up, and then that was that. Only that wasn't that, as there were dozens more arguments like that in our future. I won't bore you with all the details of each individual set to. We'd be here forever, and I only went over that first one to give you an idea of what I was dealing with. But over time, things got gradually worse until we were falling out over petty little things on a weekly basis. I really liked Sarah. I honestly did. When she was at her best, she was the perfect girlfriend. But at her worst, she was an absolute nightmare. We were together 6 months, and then when the negatives started to vastly outweigh the positives, I decided I had to man up, do the right thing for both of us, and end the relationship before things graduated to the next level, i.e. meeting parents or moving in together. To use as few words as possible, the actual breakup was much like an accomplished Argentine footballer. It was messy. On the advice of my mate's girlfriend, who by that point had apologized profusely for setting me up with Sarah, I chose to do it in a public place. But unfortunately, that didn't really help the situation. Sarah caused a massive scene, wouldn't talk to me afterwards, and it took a week before she agreed to exchange all the stuff that we'd left in each other's flats. We made the exchange, and that time, she didn't make a scene. But to say that she was frosty with me would be the understatement of the century. She acted like she despised me. So much so that I was worried that she might have snipped up my underwear with a pair of scissors and then used the same pair to scratch my DVDs. Thankfully, she'd been mature enough to do neither, and I was thoroughly relieved that I could finally close what had been a rather grim chapter of my life. Now fast forward to July of 2017. Sarah and I hadn't spoken in months. I deleted her number, and we weren't connected on any kind of social media anymore. It was a completely no-contact breakup. But she was still on my mind a little bit. I was seeing this new girl, and I'd be lying if I said Sarah hadn't made me a little bit paranoid that this girl would also eventually show her true colors. We'd been on a few dates, but we were taking things casually, and it wasn't until after the third date at a wine bar that we kissed for the first time. I got the tube home, feeling wine-drunk and rather good about myself. Then, after a flirty text exchange and what should have been a cold shower, I turned in for the night. The next thing I know, I'm opening my eyes in my dark bedroom with this distinct feeling of dread tightening my chest. I can't even really explain how I knew someone was there, but I did, and there was. Perhaps it was the gentle creak of my bedroom door opening, or the subtle feeling of my mattress sinking as they sat down on the bed next to me. Either way, I awoke to this instant feeling of vulnerability and terror. I knew how buggered I was, and I'm not exactly proud of it, but my first instinct was to roll over to quite literally beg whoever it was not to hurt me. I spun over in bed, adrenaline pumping, expecting to see some masked burglar, or, God forbid, some kind of knife-wielding lunatic. But I didn't see some balaclava-covered face, or the wild eyes of some crazed spree killer. Instead, I saw her, Sarah. I should expect some of you to think that I'd be relieved to see my ex-girlfriend in place of some armed psychopath, but for a split second, I was absolutely convinced that she was there to kill me. I remember saying, "Sarah, don't," as I slid off the opposite side of the bed from her and tried to put some distance between us. But instead of doing anything rash, Sarah simply said, "I'm sorry," and then repeated herself as she got up, walked out of my room, and continued out of my flat. I stood there for a few seconds, panting like the devil, wearing nothing but my underwear and contemplating just how close I'd come to getting murdered. As I said, I didn't have Sarah's contact details by that point, and I couldn't find any of her social media accounts, so I assumed that she'd blocked me on all of them. So instead of reaching out to her directly, I asked my mate's girlfriend to pass a message on for me, basically saying that if she came near me again, I'd be getting in touch with the police. I would have preferred to have kept it between us, I really would have. I didn't want to air out my own dirty laundry in public, let alone anyone else's. Yet, as I'm sure you'll agree, Sarah didn't leave me much of a choice on that front. It sparked a great deal of curiosity among my mate and his girlfriend, who Had to pass the message on via Facebook because she and Sarah weren't working together anymore. She said Sarah saw the message and then blocked her without so much as a word in reply. Obviously, the big question on everyone's lips was, how the hell did Sarah get into your flat that night? Well, I have a theory on that. Towards the end of our relationship, I'd say the final 2 months or so, I gave Sarah the spare key to my flat. The letting agency had given me 2 copies of the key, one to keep as a spare, but I ended up giving it to Sarah so she could let herself into the flat when I wasn't around. Sometimes she'd finished work earlier than I did, so instead of having to take the tube all the way back to Wapping, Sarah used to just let herself into my flat and wait for me there. She gave me that spare key back when we exchanged stuff, and at the time, the thought did flash in my mind that she might have made a copy. But then, after weeks went by and there were no signs of any unwelcome intrusions, I decided that I had just been a little bit paranoid. Sarah was intense, but I didn't think she was make a copy of my flat key kind of intense. Yet, as events showed, I might have been a bit too generous on that front. There's always a chance that I neglected to shut my front door properly and that Sarah just so happened to pop round at a time when I just so happened to have failed to properly secure my flat. Or, this is the one that truly scares me, she made a copy of my key, waited a little while, and then decided that she was going to sneak into my flat in the middle of the night and hurt me. Granted, I didn't see any knife or hammer in her hand. All she did was apologize before running out of my flat. But if she wanted to talk, there's a dozen different ways that she could have reached out. She most certainly didn't have to sneak into my flat in the middle of the night and then creep into my bedroom while I was dead to the world. The only reasons that she'd want to do that is to catch me unawares, and the only logical reason she'd want to catch me unawares is because she wanted to hurt me. I moved away from London just before the pandemic, so I'm confident that she and I will never cross paths again. But if we did, let's just say that I wouldn't be in a rush to grab a coffee with her anytime soon.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. I said I'm not making it up. It's the truth. It really was her. I was trembling in fear from what I had seen, but no one was believing me. Okay, fine, we will believe you. But can you tell us from the start about what happened? The officer looked at me with an expression that said calm down. So I took a long sigh and started telling my story. 1 month after my relationship to Cindy was finished, I had started to look for other girls to keep my manhood occupied. Cindy was my ex-girlfriend. I loved her. One can even say that I was obsessed with her, but she started to cheat on me. Even though I never found any proof, but I was sure she was cheating, so I had to end it. After Cindy, I was single and desperately looking for someone to date, and that's when I saw this ad about a site where you could get gorgeous chicks who weren't looking for something serious. I instantly clicked over it, and after a few failed attempts, I finally got matched to a girl. She looked hell gorgeous and sexy. I instantly started to fantasize about her. Her name was Aurora. She texted me hello, and I replied, and then she immediately texted again saying, "I'm not looking for anything serious, so don't get any wrong ideas." I smiled from that. "No worries, I'm not looking for anything serious either," I replied. After that, we started talking regularly. She would always text me first saying something naughty, and it would always stir up excitement in me. She was total opposite of Cindy. While Cindy was a simple girl who had a bubbly personality, innocent, immature, and childishness, Aurora, on the other hand, was mature, confident, and a very charming girl who knew what she was doing. I had started to look forward to her next messages. One day, while we were having a conversation, the topic turned to our interests. I asked her about her interests, and she said, "I love having romantic moments in weird places such as woods, cemeteries, etc. I fantasize about having sex in the cemetery." My whole body felt sparks from the excitement I got from her text. "I can make that come true. There's a cemetery near my house," I replied. There was no response for about 10 minutes, so I started to get nervous. And then I was relieved when she replied, "So, when should we meet?" I couldn't control my happiness and excitement, so I asked her to meet me the same night. We decided to meet after 8 p.m. She told me that I won't have to pick her up, and that she will meet me directly at the cemetery. I was extremely excited, so I didn't even take notice of it. But I had forgotten to share the address to her. I went ahead and took a bath, and after that, I got ready to meet her. I reached at the cemetery an hour early and started to wait for her. The hour passed, and it was finally 8 p.m., but she didn't arrive yet. More time passed, and I was getting impatient and angrier. After a while, I checked the time, and it was 9:45 p.m. I thought I should leave, and as I was about to take off, someone tapped over my shoulder. I turned to see it was Aurora. She was wearing a sexy blue dress. It was the shortest possible, and just by looking at her, my anger instantly fades away. I asked her what took her so long, and she said that there was something urgent came up. Now, when I was looking at her up close, I thought she was a gorgeous girl. "Do you want a kiss?" she asked. "Don't you want to talk first? You just got here." I asked her to look a bit patient, even though I wasn't. "Screw talking, so shut up and close your eyes." As she said that, I immediately listened to her command and closed my eyes. I felt her lips smashing over mine, and we started to have a passionate kiss. That's when I had this sudden urge to look at her face while kissing and open my eyes. My eyes met with a red eyes whose which blood was coming out. I pulled myself from her and screamed from anger. "Don't you want to have sex, honey?" Aurora's face had turned from beautiful to this horror. She looked like a rotten corpse, damaged dry lips, blood dripping from one eye. Her hand was broken, and I could recognize this face anywhere. It was Cindy. I started to run in order to get out from there, but she suddenly appeared in front of me. I fell down and started to crawl backwards. "Please don't hurt me, Cindy," I screamed. My entire body was trembling from fear. I somehow managed to get up and started to run toward the police station while screaming. Surprisingly, she didn't follow me. As soon as I reached there, I screamed, "I saw Cindy in the cemetery." Everyone turned towards me. I was panicking and screaming that I had seen Cindy, but no one was believing me. "But Cindy ran away from home. How can you see her as a ghost in that cemetery?" As my story finished, the officer asked me. "It's because I'm the one who killed her and buried her there." I was scared as hell and frustrated that nobody was believing anything I said, so I shouted. Everyone went quiet, and then that officer looked at me and said in a calm tone, "What are you talking about? You killed her? How?" "I will confess everything. Just save me from her. Otherwise she will kill me," I screamed. I couldn't stop panicking. I told them that day Cindy came over to my house that day and we were having an argument. I was saying that I know she is cheating on me, but she kept denying and lying. So in anger, I started to throw things on her. That's when I threw a knife without noticing and pierced through her left eye. I started to panic, and in order to cover it, I killed her and took her body at night to the cemetery and buried her there. I guess he was feeling guilty and started having delusions after killing Cindy, a man whispered in the officer's ears, which I could clearly hear. "I'm not delusional. I'm not mad. I know what I saw. You have to save me from her. She will kill me." I kept shouting while they dragged me forcefully towards the cell.
I live in a city with a public transportation system. They've been extremely short-staffed, and more often than not, you have to call to make sure your bus is even coming. On weekdays, during business hours, the public transit operator will order a lift for you to get to work if your bus isn't showing up or if they're short a driver. Tuesday, I'm at the bus stop after checking multiple times if my bus is coming, only to find out that it wasn't. They ordered me a lift, and This nice older gentleman was my driver. We had casual conversation, and he started to ask personal questions. I'm a bartender, and I'm super friendly already, so I didn't think his questions were ill-intentioned. Told him I'm not married and that I'm pretty much a loner. I basically go to work and go home and spend my time with family. He then says, "I'd marry you in a heartbeat." Again, I'm just thinking that he's being funny or nice. I asked him to drop me off at the downtown grocery so I could pick up some things that I needed for work. When we stopped, he said he was joking, that he's married and has a son my age. Asked if I was interested in maybe meeting him. Since I have a terrible track record, I figured it wouldn't hurt meeting someone out of my circle and comfort zone, so I gave the man my number and we parted ways. The next morning, he texted me and asked if I needed a ride to work. I told him he didn't have to do that and that I was sure my bus was running. He said it would be his pleasure and that he'd pick me up at my house at 3 p.m. Then about an hour later, he asked if I wanted to have lunch with him before work. I told him I was busy and that I couldn't do that. He said, "Okay, see you at 3. He shows up right at 3 and lets me know that he's outside. While I'm finishing getting my things together, I open the door and he's starting to walk up my stairs to my house. I told him I was ready and we could head downtown. When I get in the back seat, he turns around and says that he has a confession. He told me from the time I took off my mask, his heart danced like a butterfly. He said that he hasn't been able to stop thinking about me since the day before and that he'd love to spend time with me and that he'd pay me for my time if I spent a day with him. That's when I started to feel super uncomfortable. The whole ride was making me cringe, but know that when you're in a situation like that with the predator, playing nice is sometimes safer than freaking out. He continued on the entire ride about how he loved me at first sight and wanted to make me his Lebanese queen. As we got closer to downtown, I started to feel relief. He dropped me off at my hotel and said, "See you tomorrow." That evening at work, I checked my phone after a bust happy hour and he's texted me a couple of times. He sent a picture of the hotel and said that he'd wait for me to get off to give me a ride home. I told him I already had a ride, but thank you anyways. Thursday morning, I'm out running errands with my mom and sister. He texts me and asks how early he can pick me up because he can't stop thinking about me. I asked him to please stop and that I was with family. He continues to text me all day and evening, begging to see me and telling me his heart is aching to see his Lebanese queen. I just kept saying to please stop. Now Friday morning is where stuff hit the fan. He tells me he loves me no matter what. He said I told my wife about you and that I'm in love with you and I want a divorce. I told him to please don't do that and that it wasn't right to treat his wife that way. He said it wasn't my fault. They were drifting apart anyways. Then he said I'm picking up for dinner at 5:30 and I'm not taking no for an answer. I ignored the messages during the day and just went about my off day. At around 5:25, my video doorbell rings and he's standing on my porch for at least 15 minutes. I told him I wasn't home and that he should leave. He continues to text me and even begs to come pick me up from my parents. I was home the whole time, but I was just too scared to let him know that. I eventually called the non-emergency police station, but he had already left by the time I got through. I filed a general report, but technically they can't do anything unless he's standing on my porch threatening me. They advised me to make a report through Lyft, so I did. And I haven't heard anything since then, but honestly, that was one of the most threatening and creepy moments of my life. I've also attached the doorbell footage so you can get an idea of what he's like.
This is about the time when I used to work as a stripper in one of the strip clubs in Las Vegas, and it had only been a month since I started. Whenever I share my stripper stories with people, the most common question I get is, there are many jobs that you can do to earn money, so why are you stripping? Honestly, being a runaway from an orphanage and struggling to survive till you get 20 years old, you get a few ideas on where you could get good money. And for me, stripping seemed far better than stealing from people. Anyway, so I was pretty new to this stripper thing, and trust me, I saw a competition between those women who were working there. So they were no help at all, except for one girl, Kara. She seemed shy for a stripper, and after talking to her a few times, I found out it could be months for her since she started working there. The other girls were like hawks. They could tell by looking at a man how much money he'd be willing to throw on them, and what moves were best to get them to pull out their money. Since I had always been the kind of girl who learned by watching others, it wasn't hard for me to pick up on those moves myself. People coming here were all looking for fun and stuff, so it wasn't that big of a deal to wrap them around your fingers after showing some unique combination of moves. So slowly, I started to beat those girls and getting the most tips around the club. I often sneaked a few dollars and shared them with Kara later. The work in the club was strictly business, so outside that place, I was an entirely different person with dignity and all. I stopped telling people what I do for a living after giving a few negative responses, and even though stripping is still so common in Las Vegas, people's opinions of someone like me weren't pleasant ones. It sometimes stung when I saw the hungry look in those men's eyes in the club, who saw us as nothing more than prostitutes. But I tried to ignore it as much as I could. I remember the last time when I revealed my profession to someone. It was the guy that I had recently started dating, and he ended things with me the same moment by saying, "I don't think any man in their right mind would want to have a serious, committed relationship with a girl like you." I'll admit, it hurt as hell, but I got over it pretty soon and decided I would never date. It was not for me whatsoever. I'm grateful for earlier. I turned as Kara's timid voice fell on my ears. "I don't know what you're talking about." I tried not to look in her eyes. "I know you took the blame in front of the managers, knowing it was me who stole the money," she said softly while looking down. "I didn't. But now that you mention it, let me suggest that keep it to yourself." I walked away after saying that, but I could feel her gaze on my back the entire time. It was earlier that night when we were performing on stage. I went to the restroom, and when I was coming back, I saw Kara sliding dollar bills inside her bra, which were more than what she usually stole. After that, she went to the restroom, and I knew where she was going to hide the money. I knew she was having some problem at home because her brother was in a coma and all, so I acted as if I didn't see anything. But what I didn't know was that the money she stole had already been counted by the manager, and when he started asking questions, one of the older bitches ratted the two of us out, saying she'd been sliding money before. I took it. As I saw him leaning on Kara, whose face was getting paler by the minute, I shouted. He jolted his head back to me and walked over. "Where is it?" he asked in a loud, angry voice. But instead of replying, I stayed silent. Smack! A sharp slap came across my face, causing my jaws a stinging pain. "I'm asking where you put the money, bitch." He then grabbed my hair, pulled it back, and screamed in my face. I stayed silent, because I couldn't tell what I didn't have. But then another slap came right on the other cheek of my face, leaving the mark of his fingers on it. "Julie, strip this bitch, every single cloth, and check if she's hiding it in there somewhere." As he said that, she came forward with an evil smirk on her face, and even though she knew I never stripped naked even while performing, she did just that. A single tear of humiliation fell from my left eye as she searched my body, with every eye on the room on me. As I mentioned before, whatever I did here was strictly professional, and I never did such a thing when not working. So the rage I felt at that moment was beyond what one could imagine. He threatened me a few more times, but when I still didn't open my mouth after going through such humiliation, he let me go, while saying he was going to deduct the money from my pay. After Kara apologized to me, I went straight to my apartment, but I couldn't sleep thinking of whatever I just went through. It was when I came across an article that more than 200 people vanish each month in Las Vegas without a trace or possibility of coming back. I got an idea of what to do. The girl who ratted me out was Julie, and looking at how much she was enjoying ripping my clothes off my body, I had to teach her a lesson. Luckily for me, I knew where she lived. Not so much for her though. Her apartment was within 10 minutes of walking distance from the club, so I went straight to her place. By living on the streets and breaking into people's houses to steal, I had learned a thing or two, so unlocking her door and walking in there was a piece of cake. I was startled by a few muffling sounds, so I tried to listen closely, only to realize it was moaning and panting sounds coming out of her bedroom. I went ahead to watch the show. When I saw the manager on top of Julie, my blood started to boil. So these two were having an affair all this time. That was why she was so smug about ruining our lives. I grabbed the half-filled wine bottle that was on the kitchen top from the base in my other hand. I sneaked in there when they didn't notice, and by the time they could realize, I broke the wine bottle on the manager's head. Just before Julie could scream, I hit her with the vase. The two of them passed out that instant. I knew very well that they were just unconscious and not dead, but I wasn't going to let this chance go. I grabbed all the alcohol bottles from the kitchen and emptied its contents throughout the room. After starting a fire, I locked the bedroom from the outside and leaked the gas pipes in the kitchen before exiting her apartment. I was thinking of only scaring Julie by making her think that she was kidnapped, but the rage I felt after watching the two of them together brought back all the memories of their slaps and humiliation, and that turned me into an arsonist. Hey Kara, listen, do you want to move to New York with me? I think your brother could get better treatment there, and we could find a better strip club than this one too. What do you say? I called Kara as I was walking back to my apartment. Well, she didn't agree after all and said she would continue to work in Las Vegas, but would try to look for a better job than stripping. And I moved to New York the very next day since I didn't want to get caught after killing two people who bullied me. I still wonder how come police didn't find me. I know what I would have been seen as the prime suspect if a proper investigation was to be held. Maybe the owner of the club had something to do with it. Who knows? But whatever, it's in my favor, so who cares?